Hi friends, welcome to my channel. So today we are going to see how you can configure explicit web proxy on Fortigate Firewall running on 640. So let's get started. Before starting anything, you will have to go to System, Feature Visibility. You will have to locate the feature that you want to use, which is Explicit Proxy. You will have to enable this. All right, so this will be disabled by default. You will have to enable it here under feature visibility, and you'll have to click apply. And then once you do that, you will be able to see this option. If you don't do that, you will not be able to see that option. For example, I'll show you one more time. So right now the explicit proxy is disabled, and you can see there is no option of explicit proxy here, and there is no proxy policy here. So I'm going to enable this feature. By the way, this particular scenario is with the proxy auto configuration, whereas I have stored the Pac file on my external web server. If you want, you can host this particular Pac file on the firewall itself, but then it is always recommended that you keep this Pac file external in some web server in that domain. So I have a web server. It is not a web server, basically it is a open source pfSense firewall, where as in it is acting as a DNS resolver for me, as well as it is fetching that Pac file. So I'm going to cover all this in some time. So first of all, we will see right now the feature is enabled. If you go under network, you will see explicit proxy. So before that, I would like you to go to interface. Since this firewall is having two interfaces, one is the ISP interface, which is leasing out the private IP. Other one is the port 2, which is all for my intranet communication. I don't use this particular internet link here. So we will have clients connecting to port 2 on a proxy port. And basically just think of this firewall as in it is receiving the traffic on port 2, and it is sending out the traffic from port 1 out to internet. So whichever interface will receive the proxy traffic, you will have to go to that interface, and then you will have to enable the explicit web proxy here, since I have already configured that. So you will have by default disabled explicit web proxy. Click here, enable it, click OK. So now your interfaces are configured for the explicit web proxy. This is the first step. Now you will have to come to explicit proxy. Okay, so this will be disabled again by default. Once you enable this, you will have to choose your interface, which is my port 2. And then you will have to specify the HTTP port. In my case, I'm given as 8080. So I have given that port here. Now you will have to specify the HTTPS port. In my case, I'm going to use the same port, which is 8080. If you want, you can change this. Let's try to change this to, let's say, 4554. 4554. You can give a range as well, but then in my case, I'm sticking to a single port, which is 8080 for the HTTP traffic, and for HTTPS 4554. So now, well, the next configuration is about the proxy auto configuration, how you actually download this file. So the Pac file is a file which contains your proxy information. It is usually written in JavaScript, and it will contain all the information about how you actually want the endpoint to send traffic to the proxy. What are the IPs that you should accept? This is just an example. So in my case, I have created a very simple file, which I'm going to show you now. So think of this as a web server. Okay. So this is a very simple, um, what do you call, a JavaScript, which tells the endpoint or the clients that the proxy IP is this and the proxy port is 3128. So what I'm going to do here is I already have created, so this is the file which is telling that the proxy IP is 140.40.108 on port 8080. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stick to this, and I'm going to change my port to 8080. Or you can click here, which says basically you use the same HTTP port. Whichever is suiting your environment, you go ahead with that configuration. And this is the configuration, whereas in the Pac file is stored on the firewall itself, the Fortigate firewall. So I'm going to show you this configuration as well. First of all, I'm going to show this. Okay, this is a simple file, fortigate.pac, which contains the information about the proxy IP and port. Okay, which is running on an external web server. And this file is downloadable. So I have a URL. I'll I'll show you in some time. Let me explain you this configuration. So the proxy auto configuration, well, you can have this file on your firewall itself, but in my case, I don't have it on the firewall. I have it on my web server. So if you want to have it on your firewall, you can basically give the port number, and then you can edit the Pac file content here, and you can paste the same content there as well. Okay, or you can download this and you can manually export this Pac file into your web browser. This is your FQDN. So your DNS server is supposed to resolve this to the interface IP. Okay, in our case, it is going to resolve to 14.140.40. 108. Okay, so whatever URL you are specifying there, it should resolve to that particular interface which is listening for that proxy connections. Okay, in my case, I already have a proxy Pac URL, which is, let me show you. So you can see here. So you can see here, I'm using the DNS as 14.140.40.109, which is basically the interface IP of my web server, which is resolving the query. Okay, and the query is going to be, or the PAC file is stored on web server, and the web server URL for that PAC file is. So you can see here when I'm pinging wpat.example.com, it is resolving to 14.140.40.109, which is my web server, okay, which is having that PAC file. In your case, if you're hosting this PAC file on the Fortigate firewall, then make sure your DNS is resolving the proxy FQDN to that particular IP address, and you can do that here. For example, you can create a static, what do you call, entries. This is just an example that I've created here. So if you want the FortiGate firewall to resolve the query for the clients, so you can go ahead and give the DNS IP as 14.140.40.108. In my case, I have an external DNS server which is resolving the domain, the web server URL. So I don't have to do this configuration. Okay. So this was the configuration of PAC file when you have the PAC file on your firewall itself. I'm going to show you certain commands which will be useful for you people to understand basically what is the configuration. So this is the configuration. As you can see on the FortiGate CLI, status is enabled. HTTP incoming port is 8080. HTTPS is same 8080. SOC is the protocol that we are using for the proxy. One is HTTP. You have SOC 4. You have SOC 4A. You have SOC 5. So these are the configuration for that. And then the PAC file, you can see here status is enabled, and the PAC file port 8080, and then the PAC file name, which is proxy. So how to get the PAC file URL? Well, in order to get the PAC file URL, once you have the PAC file configured here, or you can, edit the content of the PAC file here, paste the PAC file that is suited in your environment. In my case, I have a very simple content in my PAC file, which is returning the proxy IP and port. This is the Fortigate firewall IP, and this is the port on which Fortigate firewall is listening for all the proxy connection. So you can copy paste this information here. After clicking edit, it'll open up a window. You can paste that content there. You can download the PAC file. You can manually export the content in the browser, or you can use a URL to force the browser to automatically download the content of the PAC file. So now rest of the thing is okay. Click apply. It's very simple here. So now once you have done that, there's one more thing here. Default firewall behavior is to deny the traffic on 8080. Well, this is the best practice. Once you have deny here, you will have the configuration is done here. You will have to go to policy and object. You'll have to create a policy, proxy policy. Well, I already have a proxy policy, I guess, which is, you know, not restricting anything usually. So here is my, let's try to create a new proxy policy. Okay, so your proxy policy will look like this. Okay, so my explicit web proxy is on port 2. Port 2 is listening for all the proxy connection. Okay, here I have to specify my outgoing interface, which is port 1. Source, I'm going to keep it as all. Destination, I'm going to keep it as all because I am just testing the feature and I'm just giving a tutorial on how you can do a setup. Okay, this particular policy will govern what kind of traffic is actually allowed on your proxy configuration. So by default, you have all the ports listed, except and then if you want, you can have your SSL inspection. Basically, you do proxy to do a lot of stuffs like inspecting the content of the HTTP traffic, HTTPS traffic. So URL filtering, malware detection, everything you can do by doing the proxy. So in my case, I don't have the license for the SSL inspection. So if even if I use the certificate inspection or custom deep inspection or a deep inspection, the firewall is going to intercept the connection, and the upstream connection to the actual server will then be presented with a very weak cipher, which will then be rejected by the actual server. Let's say, for example, the client is trying to reach google.com. So the traffic will be intercepted by the firewall. Okay, and then the firewall will then initiate a new connection towards the actual server. So I'm going to explain you the steps as well, what happens in the proxy configuration. So I'm not going to inspect anything. So in your case, if you have the license, you can go ahead and do the SSL deep inspection, which will be giving you the flexibility of blocking the URL and doing a lot of stuff with your application data. So now that we have the proxy policy configured, now everything is okay. So you should have a firewall policy. Okay, port 2 to port 1, allow. Okay. Now, so like I said, so this is my web server URL. Okay. And this is my web server IP where my proxy file is stored. So this is the URL. Let me show you the content as well. So this is the content of that proxy file. Okay. So before using the URL, make sure you are testing the same URL here. And you may have issues with the communication to your web server if you don't have the certificate. So make sure your web server is having HTTP in case you don't want to use the certificate. In my case, I have the certificate downloaded and I have imported the certificate to the search store, trusted CA inside the Mozilla Firefox. So So you can see here, I am able to download the FortiGate Pac file. Okay, so which means my link is working properly. So the next step is to configure the browser. Okay, so in order to do that, go to options, come down to network settings in Mozilla. Most of the browsers have the same kind of configuration for the proxy, so you don't have to wonder. Just click on settings and try to find the LAN settings or proxy settings under advanced section. So this is Mozilla, and like you can see here, I'm going to set this to manual proxy first, just to show you, and then after that we will be using automatic proxy configuration. Okay, this is my HTTP. So I have the port as 8080 for HTTP. I'm going to use the same port for HTTPS as well. So now this is a typical proxy settings, manual proxy settings. After this, I'm going to show you the other way around, which is the proxy PAC URL method. Since I'm not doing any kind of SSL inspection, so you don't see this certificate getting altered by Fortigate Firewall. If you're doing any kind of SSL inspection on the Fortigate Firewall, the Fortigate Firewall is going to alter this. Okay, so let's try to understand what happens when you try to set up a proxy on a client, and then how the communication is on. Okay, so let's try to open up Wireshark quickly. So on FortiGate Firewall, if you're hosting your Pac file, the command to If you type this command, get web proxy explicit, it is going to show you the hint. So if you're hosting the Pac file on the firewall itself, it is going to be HTTP 14.140.40.108 colon 8080 slash proxy.pac, the file name. Okay. So this URL, you can go ahead and enter that on your browser. So right now we are checking the manual configuration. So after this, I'm going to show you the URL technique as well. So we have the captures right now. So this is the capture on the client, which is initiating the traffic. Okay. If you closely look at this, this is the client 14.140.40.155 is making a request to 14.140.40.108. Okay. So it is establishing the three-way handshake, the TCP communication. And then this is for a different domain, I guess the Mozilla. Okay, this one is the one. So whenever a client is trying to reach out to any web server or any domain, it is going to send a connect message, which is HTTP connect. Okay, it is a HTTP information, not encrypted. So all the communication from the client, if proxy is configured, will be towards that particular IP, proxy IP, and the port. So you can clearly see here 8080 as destination port. So the client will send a HTTP connect message to the Fortigate firewall, which is listening on port 2 for all the proxy connection. And under that, you will see the resource that the client is trying to reach. In our case, since we were trying to reach out to YouTube, so it is sending a connect. Okay, this is a HTTP type, the connect message, which will tell the FortiGate's firewall to establish a tunnel towards youtube.com. So the connect message, HTTP message, is to instruct the server to establish a tunnel with the specific resource mentioned in the content of the connect. So you can see here the content of the connect message, www.youtube.com on port 443. Okay, this is the content of the connect. The request is going to 8080. This is the proxy IP 14.140.40.108, and the request is for connect www.youtube.com on 443. So this information will then be used by the Fortigate firewall to create a SSL tunnel towards youtube.com. Okay, you can see here method connect URI. This will be used by the Fortigate firewall to establish the SSL tunnel. These are the information about the agent or the client which is trying to, initiate the traffic. Once this information is sent, it will be acknowledged by the FortiGate firewall, and then you will have 200 connection established. Okay. Once it is done, so this is 200. Okay. So connection is established. Once it is done, you will have a SSL tunnel between the client and the firewall, and from the firewall towards the actual uh, web server that you're trying to reach. In our case, it is going to be youtube.com. So you can clearly see client hello. This is the client hello. And here you can see that we are trying to reach youtube.com, but we are sending the traffic to 14.140.40.108 because our firewall knows now with the help of the connect message that the client is trying to reach out to youtube.com, and I'm supposed to do the proxy and supposed to do a separate tunnel towards the youtube.com. So this is the Ssl handshake from the client to the server. You can see here the source and the destination. It is not YouTube, it is the firewall IP. This is the server hello. This particular what you call the certificate that you are getting here is on unaltered. Since we are not doing any kind of inspection, so you basically don't see any what do you call the certificate presented by the FortiGate firewall to the client. If the firewall is doing the proxy SSL inspection, then you will have to export that particular certificate onto your browser just to make your browser understand or trust that FortiGate certificate CA. So here is the information: proxy connect hostname, youtube.com, proxy port 443. This is actually sent to 14.140.40. Okay, so this is the information. So once you have the SSL connection done, then you will start sending the data to the firewall, and then the firewall will then be forwarding the traffic to the actual youtube.com. So you will have two what do you call SSL tunnel, one from the client to the FortiGate firewall, other from the firewall to the actual youtube.com. So in our case, we are not doing any inspection, so the firewall is actually forwarding the traffic, whatever he's receiving on port 2 on 8080. Well, this was about the manual configuration. Let's try to move on with the proxy auto configuration. So this was about the manual configuration. Now we will try to have the proxy auto configuration. We have already tested the URL. Okay, so this is my web server URL, and I'm going to change this with my Pac file, which is fortigate.pac. Okay, Once I do that, the browser is going to download the Pac file from this URL. You can give the Fortigate Firewall as well. Like I said, the URL, you can get it from this particular command, get web proxy explicit, will give you a hint about how the URL will look like. Whatever IP interface, whichever interface is listening for that proxy connection, IP address of that interface, colon the proxy port that you have used, then slash the proxy file name, which in my case is proxy. So it will show up like this. You can copy this URL, paste it to your browser, so that browser automatically downloads that content. Okay, let's try to test this. So you can see here, all the traffic is forwarded to 8080, which is our proxy port. So you can see here the communication, and one more time, I'm going to show you by trying out another website. Let's try youtube.com. So you can see here the client sending the connect HTTP connect to the server, proxy server, instructing the proxy server to establish the SSL tunnel towards the YouTube web server, and post that you will have HTTP 101.1 200 OK, and then you will have a SSL connection from the client to the proxy server, and from the proxy server towards the actual youtube.com. So this was about how you can configure the proxy auto configuration on your browser and on the Fortigate firewall, how you can automatically download the Pac file from the external web server, which is recommended, or the Fortigate firewall itself in certain scenarios. So if you're doing that, make sure your DNS is resolving the particular FQDN which you have given for the PAC configuration. Let me show you one more time before I close this session. So if you're hosting your PAC file on the Fortigate Firewall itself, then make sure the proxy fqdnabc.com is getting resolved properly by your DNS server. If you want to make Fortigate Firewall as your DNS server, then you can do this. So you can have a static entry which will then resolve abc.com to 14.140.40.108, which is going to be the Fortigate Firewall interface IP. Once you do that, you will be able to download the pack file from the Fortigate Firewall itself. There are other methods as well, like web proxy auto discovery protocol, which uses DHCP and DNS. There are two ways for web proxy auto configuration that I'm going to cover, or I'm going to cover much more in depth about the proxy configuration on open source PF Sense Firewall. And I'm going to show you the flexibility and the benefits of using proxy on for PF Sense Firewall after this particular session. So please do subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and just wait for my next video where I'm going to explain you all the benefits of proxy. Because PF Sense Firewall is open source, you don't have to have the license, and I can show you everything what you can do with the proxy. All right, guys, stay safe. Have a good day. Okay, before I close, you can see here the NS lookup for abc.com. If in case you choose to, use the other way around, whereas in you will try to download the pack file from the Fortigate firewall. So you can see here, it is getting resolved to Fortigate firewall interface IP. Once it is done, you should be able to download the pack file from the Fortigate firewall. Bye-bye.